Okay, welcome everybody. Thanks for coming out on a rainy, windy night, on election night 2018. Noam Chomsky says this is the most important election in his lifetime, which is pretty remarkable in two respects. One is he's pretty old, and secondly, you know, it's a midterm election. So I think he's concerned with the annihilation of the planet, concerning climate issues, but also the nuclear arms race picking back up. But closer to home, of course, there's issues all over the country, and closer to home and in other places around the country, we're seeing a lot more around criminal justice reform, which is really quite remarkable. I mean, it really, really is, right? And you have to understand, it wasn't very long ago where no one wanted to talk about criminal justice issues. The labor unions didn't want to talk about it. The civil rights organizations didn't want to talk. Nobody wanted to talk about it. They wanted to distance themselves from this issue. And now it's here. And it's here, it's around the country because of a lot of hard work, grassroots organizations that have brought it here. I was just saying to Peter, I mean, there are people running for office who have made criminal justice reform as part of their platforms. I mean, that's unheard of, right? That's new. That's progress. So in the last, this semester, this fall semester, we've had a criminal justice program here at the Social Justice Institute. I'm Tim Black, the co-director. So we had James Foreman Jr. here in September to talk about his Pulitzer Prize-winning book, Locking Up Our Own. We had Bruce Western here just a few weeks ago. I know some of you were able to see that. And he was talking about his new book, Homeward, the First Year in Life After Prison. And tonight we're turning the focus to more local issues, shining a light on collateral sanctions and collateral consequences. What happens after people return from prison, men and women return from prison. And so what we're going to do tonight is we're going to start off with Peter Truog, who's the Director of Civic Innovation and Insight at the Fund for Our Economic Future, and he's going to present a new report on collateral consequences, again, focusing locally. What are the costs of collateral consequences? And this is a report that is hot off the press. In fact, it's not even out there yet, right? It's soon to be out there. And so we're going to have Peter's presentation, and then we have a panel who will provide some commentary on this issue and on Peter's presentation, and then we'll open it up to others. And part of the reason for doing this is not just simply to focus on what's going on locally, but also just to give you a sense of, for those of you who aren't aware of what's going on in the community, of just the energy around this issue and the energy from young people. And yes, I do consider you all young people. Everything is relative here, right? And I do consider young people. And I'm teaching a course on race and mass incarceration this semester, and I just had Caitlin Hill and Malekti Malaku, I always get hung up on that. Malekti Malaku here from the ACLU, who are working on bail reform. Young, energetic, good stuff. So let me introduce Peter, have him come up and talk, and then I'll introduce the panel and for commentary. So Peter, in his role as director of the Civic Innovation and Insight at the Fund for Economic Future, he helps the fund, its partners, and the broader community visualize and understand the impact of its work, taking lessons learned in the past and applying them to future endeavors. Peter frequently spends his spare time brainstorming ways to use data analytics to visualize trends and solve problems. So he considers himself fortunate to now put that habit to productive use in his role with the fund. He returned to Cleveland after serving at the fund as a fellow in 2015. He's excited to contribute to the fund's mission of making Northeast Ohio a better place to live for everyone. We had Peter and Kevin Allen here last year, some of you will remember, and they presented on their work looking at wealth accumulation through a racial lens and to raving reviews. It was really terrific. So we're really interested in hearing your work, your current work, Peter. Please welcome Peter Truog.
Yeah, good evening, everybody. So as Tim mentioned, my name's Peter. We got a pretty small group here tonight, community atmosphere. So maybe just take a quick minute, introduce yourself to who you're next to. Let's kind of get to know each other a little bit. Say hi to your neighbor. If you know your neighbor, say hi to somebody who's sitting behind you. So as Tim mentioned, I'll speak for maybe 15, 20 minutes here. I'll try to move expeditiously. Before I begin, I just really want to say thank you to you all, first of all, for making it out tonight. It's a cold, windy night, and y'all are here. Thanks to Tim. It's an honor to be part of these conversations. This is, as he mentioned, this is the second time now that we're really kind of publicly debuting some work that we've done at the Social Justice Institute. So it's really exciting. And as much as the introduction is flattering, this is far from just my work. This is something that a lot of people, many who are here tonight, have had a lot of input in. The report is I'm literally reviewing it right now to get it finalized. Many have also been involved in the review process. So it's me talking, but it's the voice of a lot of input and feedback coming through tonight. So. Thanks to everybody who's been involved. It would be remiss, we're working with Policy Matters Ohio and the Ohio Justice and Policy Center on the report itself, and they've put a lot of work into that as well. So just want to make sure I mention them here. All right, so I said I'll talk for about 15 minutes. I want to set a little bit of context, maybe share some of the work that we've been working on with you all tonight. I'm going to just preface, I'm going to shine kind of my ray of light on this topic. Disclaimer, it's going to be from maybe a research perspective, from some of an economic development perspective. And I'm going to be really excited to then team with all my partners up here on the panel so that they can each shine their ray. Since there's so many ways to approach this topic and a lot of ways to look at it, from research, from personal experience, from day-to-day work. Everybody brings their own perspective to it. So I'll begin by sharing mine. Cool. So I work at an organization called the Fund for Economic Future. It is an organization focused on driving inclusive economic development in Northeast Ohio. So we work here in Cleveland, as well as in Akron, Youngstown, and Canton, advancing what we call growth and opportunity, what you see at the top left up there. We've been around for about 15 years. We're a collaboration of philanthropies in Northeast Ohio who together pool their resources to support issues of economic competitiveness and inclusive growth across the region. You can see here some of the work that we've done in the past. We've supported a lot of economic development organizations trying to do good work in the region. We support initiatives that are workforce focused, so we can create a skilled workforce to take advantage of some of the jobs that are being created. And we work in areas of job access. So you need to have jobs, you need to have people who are ready for the jobs, and they need to be able to get there. And so over time, this was a major focus of our work. We were working with economic development organizations, trying to create jobs, thinking about the economy. But it's become abundantly clear, perhaps now more than ever, that just focusing on the growth side of the equation alone is insufficient to creating a truly inclusive and competitive economy. You need to be focused on issues of access, barriers that limit an individual's ability to connect to economic opportunity in order to really hit both sides of that growth and opportunity imperative. And that's what we'll be talking about tonight. One in particular that is getting a lot of attention these days, that of collateral sanctions. So maybe show of hands before we move on. Who's heard of collateral sanctions before? Can people? Okay, so maybe 60-some-odd% of the room. So for those who haven't, here's a definition. I won't read it to you, but take a look. All right, so these are legal laws that exist on the books in Ohio that limit an individual's ability to find housing, find jobs, to do a whole number of things upon returning back to society. Focused particularly tonight on the impact that it's going to have, that these laws have on an individual's ability to succeed in the economy. So there'll be some numbers tonight, but in Ohio, there are 850 laws on the books that restrict an individual's ability to access employment if they have a criminal record. 250 of those restrict access to specific jobs, and 600 restrict access to licensing. So it's a wide range of legal entanglements that combine to create a major barrier for returning citizens when it comes to reintegrating into the economy and finding access to economic opportunity. So as an economic development organization, it's kind of interesting that we care. A lot of economic organizations don't necessarily, and it's again it's because this is such a barrier for individuals when it comes to thinking about their ability to access a lot of the growth that's going on around them that we've really spotlighted this issue. And I think there are a whole number of reasons why we should care, from a moral perspective for sure. Where the genesis of this work that I'll be speaking on tonight came from is the aspiration to also create a really strong economic argument behind why we should care about this issue, so that we can broaden the audience of people who understand the implications of collateral consequences and speak to different people in new ways to hopefully galvanize new coalitions behind the issue. So who does this impact? Who's affected by collateral sanctions? How many people? A lot. So this is 92,000 by the estimates of this report across the state. It's a lot of individuals. It's like a lot of people who every day are facing the challenges of navigating their way through these complex systems, going through education and schooling programs to train for jobs, and then coming up against these barriers as they look for employment. This impacts many people across the state. And the impact doesn't fall equally. Black Ohioans are 6 times more likely to have served time than whites across the state. Estimates about a quarter of Black Ohioans have a felony of some kind. The impact of these sanctions doesn't fall equally on communities or individuals. And I'll share a little bit around some of the systemic nature of how these impacts fall as we go through. So how do we get here? How do we come to this situation where so many people are impacted? We have so many of these laws on the books, and as a result, we're, from the economic perspective, really limiting the competitiveness of our region as a whole. What happened? So personally for me, there's a whole, have people gone through the Racial Equity Institute training? Anybody in here? A show of hands? A handful. To me, I think it's helpful to look, in answering this question, look back a little bit at our history and understand how we've gotten to this point as a society, who has created the society, who's created the systems and structures that are in place that individuals must navigate as they come through society, to understand a little bit about those numbers that we just showed. So I won't go into a great deal of detail here, but so this shows population here in the city of Cleveland over time, broken down by race. You can see, from the 1800s until now, how the city was composed. And over the top, we've overlaid a little bit of just like historical time periods over that. And to me, I ask myself a couple questions when I look at this slide. So, who over the course of all these time periods, when it comes to either the companies that are being created down the bottom, the systems that are in place, whether you're looking back into periods of slavery and Reconstruction, all the way through civil rights and even in today, asking a couple questions I think helps start to get to some of the answers in terms of how we got here. So over this time period, who was designing the systems that are in place in our society? Who was in power to design it? Who was able to influence the decision-making over the course of the city's history? And who was in a position to benefit from the systems that we were all putting in place? It's pretty clear that, no matter kind of where you look, it was white leaders across the city who were in those positions of designing the systems and structures that we all must navigate and face today. Just to really put it home, I think this is a pretty compelling statement, right? Looking at that arc of history, less than a quarter of the years of our nation's history have included legal protection against racial discrimination. And so if you're looking at back over that period of time and taking a perspective of looking at systems and institutions that are in place that are impacting people's lives, this is one way to start to get to the question of who was in power, who was influencing decision-making, and how do we get to where we are today. This has a whole lot of effects, right? So some of the disparities that we saw in these at the outset here in terms of the disparate impact of criminal justice, they're persisting today and can be seen across systems, oftentimes getting worse, right? It's not just in criminal justice alone where we see these disparities. And over the next couple of slides, I'll speak a little bit to some of the systemic nature of these challenges, right? That it's not just the criminal justice system, it's not just education, it's not just healthcare, but it really spans the gamut. This chart here shows the changes in wealth and household wealth over time and the increasing racial wealth gap across the country, right? Big and getting worse. It was about 5x in the 1980s, and it's only increased today. Similarly, if you look at income disparity across Northeast Ohio in each of the 4 major metropolitan areas, you can see that what these lines show is the difference in average monthly income between whites and blacks in any of the 4 major Northeast Ohio areas. And you can see that over the past about 15 years, the disparities in income on a monthly basis have gone up in every single one of the different regions. Some may have seen this chart before, but this then broadens the lens, right? We've focused on criminal justice, we focused on the economy in the past couple slides. If you look into other systems, whether it's healthcare, education, and again, some other indicators in criminal justice and the economy, the story remains the same, right? No matter where you look across different systems, the outcomes, you're seeing African Americans with higher likelihood of negative outcomes across all of these systems. And so I think I pause here, and this slide is really impactful for me, right? For a couple of reasons. One, the fact that no matter where you look, you're seeing these disparities, right? They're interplayed and they're interrelated. If you have worse health outcomes, your ability to succeed in the economy is likely negatively impacted. In which case, you're probably less likely to be able to send your kids, to great healthcare, and the cycle could repeat. If you're having worse educational outcomes, your ability to succeed in the economy is highly linked to that, in which case you may end up having worse health outcomes as you're not supporting your family in the same way. These systems are all interrelated, and when we start to see the ways in which across systems we're seeing the same outcomes, it starts to paint a picture of when we think about these issues of how collateral consequences impact people, when we think about how we might go about addressing some of those issues so that, from our perspective, we can have a more competitive economy, you start to realize that this picture is inextricably linked, and we can't just look within our own systems. The final point that I'll make on this about kind of the extent of the disparity and why we should care, and why as an economic development organization we care about this issue of how collateral consequences limits and abilities in an individual's ability to participate in the economy, is from some research that we actually presented here last year. We were curious, digging in here, started to look around on understanding the extent to which racial inequity shows up across the different systems of Northeast Ohio. To look at the economy kind of on a macro level and understand wages within Northeast Ohio. Looking at compensation that's generated here each year in the economy that individuals are earning, and how can we break that down by race. Within Greater Cleveland, each year, individuals take home just about $70 billion worth of income, right? You add up all the compensation that people are paid around Greater Cleveland, it's around $69 billion worth of income. Looking at who's employed in what industries, what jobs they're working, how much they're getting paid in those occupations, we were able to disaggregate that and see that of that 69, 57 billion is going to white workers here in Cleveland. And alone, that's a startling fact. And it starts to make more sense when you start to look across all the systems and see the ways in which this number is going to be inherently influenced by outcomes that we look at in criminal justice, in healthcare, and in education. So I'll move towards the closing here just by coming back to where we started around collateral consequences, right? As we move into this work as an economic development organization, looking at the way in which this criminal justice issue impacts an individual's ability to succeed in the economy, this picture and the systemic nature of the problem, it was very clear, right? We must expand our view outside of our own individual silo and think across systems what interplays exist, and that's how we came upon this issue. The findings from this are pretty startling. So we looked across the economy at all of the jobs that are here in Ohio, and thanks to work that was done by the Ohio Justice and Policy Center, where they've cataloged all of the collateral sanctions that are in place, you're able to see that nearly a quarter of jobs in the state are restricted by some kind of collateral sanction. It's an incredible statistic. If you look at what types, they're fast-growing jobs, they're jobs that tend to pay a living wage, and they're often jobs that people think of as career pathway, career ladder work. What's on the left here is a list of the fastest growing jobs in the state that are impacted by sanctions. Those that are in yellow are in the healthcare field. And then on the right, you can see these jobs pay significantly higher than non-sanctioned jobs, and they're growing at twice the rate. This is where a lot of opportunity is. Right? And so if you start to put these pieces together, the impact of these collateral consequences on the ability for our regional economy to be inclusive, to be equitable, and therefore to be more competitive, the picture starts to become clear about the interplay between these two sectors. What is interesting, though, and I'm sure a lot of people will have other examples. Here's one: is that this is not an insolvable problem. Right? There's a lot of ways that we can begin to work on this issue. Tim mentioned at the beginning the energy that's behind criminal justice right now. There's a lot of people who are really increasingly active, have been active for a super long time, and there's a lot of work to build on in this space. I found this example to be particularly inspiring about Johns Hopkins. They are in the healthcare sector, obviously, one of the most highly sanctioned sectors of the economy, where collateral consequences are most restrictive in terms of your ability to get a job. Initially, they had no experience hiring returning citizens. They self-examined, they changed some of their policies, and have dramatically opened access to opportunity for residents who live around the hospital to have access to a lot of the work. And I think importantly, at the bottom, with essentially no negative repercussions, right? I think there's models that are out there that could exist, whether it's from a legislative example of how can we think critically about what sanctions are on the books, how narrowly or broadly they apply, to employer-facing examples like this one, where you can begin to piece together some interesting examples of ways to begin to make a difference in this space. We should care because the opportunity is huge. If you think about the cost of foregone wages, so you remember the 92,000 people who are impacted and unemployed as a result of collateral sanctions today, and you think about the foregone wages that represents, it's a very large number, over $3 billion worth of productivity. And so, yes, there is 100% a moral case, a very strong case to be made as a human for why we should care. The intent of this work that we're hoping to, sharing with you all for the first time really tonight, and increasingly going to be speaking about, is trying to also expand the awareness around the economic argument behind why people should care about this issue, so that we can speak to more diverse and broad audiences about its wide-ranging impact. So I'm not sure how I did on the time. I don't know if I managed my 15 or 20 minutes. I was trying my best. I'll leave us kind of with this, that it's clear that there's a dual prong here in terms of a strong moral case and a strong economic case for examining this issue. It's going to take this whole room, right? Alone, no single institution, sector, individual can truly shift the needle. We're all going to need to work together on this. No matter what we pursue, being intentional about how we're addressing the disparities by race is going to be a really critical part of dialing back and changing a lot of what we see up on the slides. So I'll turn it over a little bit. Happy to answer questions. I'll be around. But thank you very much for your time. I really appreciate being able to be here and share this all with you tonight.
Thanks, Peter. So while you're digesting all that information, let me introduce the panelists. I'll ask each of the panelists to speak about 12 minutes, something like that. Hold it to around 12 minutes. And then we'll open it up for a broader discussion. I want you to hear from the panelists. These are really strong, informed voices in the community dealing with these issues. They'll provide some commentary to Peter's report, but also drill down through their own respective areas as it pertains to collateral consequences. On my far left is Crystal Bryant, is lifelong Cleveland resident and currently serves as the director of the Cuyahoga County Office of Reentry. With degrees and professional licenses in law and social work, Crystal has a unique set of experiences that have helped to shape her career. She began her service to the public working as a drug court case manager and was then promoted to the position of adult program specialist with the Cuyahoga County Alcohol, Drug, Addiction, Mental Health Services Board. In 2013, Crystal worked as a program officer of Cuyahoga Job and Family Services, and before joining the Office of Reentry, Crystal worked as an assistant prosecuting attorney for the city of Cleveland. I know you're thinking the prosecutor's office, but it was in this capacity that Crystal considered herself the people's prosecutor, often seeking justice for victims and negotiating plea agreements that were fair. Under her current leadership, the County Office of Reentry works to strengthen collaboration, partnership, and advocacy efforts to remove barriers and stigma that make it difficult for a successful reintegration into society. Welcome, Crystal. Next to Crystal is Bashara Addison, who is the Senior Manager over Policy and Strategic Initiatives at Towards Employment, a 42-year-old workforce development organization that places over 500 individuals in full-time employment every year, many of whom have criminal records. Since she graduated in 2010 from the George Washington University with a BA in political science, she has dedicated her career to working with folks who face barriers to entering the labor market. Notably, during the latter part of 2012 and the spring of 2013, Bashara was engaged in a statewide advocacy effort to shape policies around collateral sanctions. In 2015, Bashara served in a one-year fellowship with the CEO of the Cleveland School District, then as project manager in the district's Strategic Implementation Office to improve school attendance. She is now back working with Towards Employment, focused on policy related to workforce and reentry, and has been supporting the Issue 1 campaign voted on, of course, today, as has everyone on this panel. Closest to me, Damian Calvert is the project coordinator for the Community Relations Board of the City of Cleveland. He was born and raised in Akron. Damian spent 18 and a half years of what he refers to as true life experience in state prison. During his time incarcerated, Damian founded and was the inaugural president of the prison's NAACP chapter, became a certified American Red Cross instructor, served as management director of the Junior Chamber of Commerce, facilitated various educational workshops, mentored at-risk adolescents who came into the facility from surrounding counties through the Heart to Heart program, and most notably wrote, proposed, and received authorization to facilitate the Reentry Premier program, which helped men prepare for successful transition back into their respective communities. That was all inside. Today, in addition to the anti-violence work he does in the city, Damian works with a large number of reentry preparation programs in a variety of different capacities and still does work in state prisons. Closer to home, here at the university, he was my research assistant for 4 years on a project focusing on men returning to the community. And he is now the university's internal review board, is on the university's internal review board, where he reviews research proposals at the university that involve an incarcerated population. So please welcome our panelists. And let's start with Crystal.
Sure. All right, so good evening. I hate mics. I was just going to ask, is my voice projecting well, but now I have a mic, so I'm sure you can hear me. All right. So how many of you actually knew that you had a government office of reentry? I know some of these faces, so don't cheat. You right there. All right, that's not a very large show of hands. So for those of you who did not know you had a government office of reentry, I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about what we do, and so that way when you give your questions, you'll better understand why I'm here and what I can answer for you and the government's context of our work. So you heard Tim kind of mention, no one person, or Peter kind of mentioned, no one person can navigate this entire system because there's multiple complex systems. And so who's going to step up to the plate to decide, well, who's going to try to be the convener, to have some order around all these different systems and help them have collective impact and strategize how they want to work together? Who's going to do that? Me. So this office has been in existence for about 9 years. We are primarily a funder. We are under the auspices of Health and Human Services. So that means something for a reason. Our mission for Health and Human Services is to serve people. Office of Reentries have no format. They're not required by law. They're not in your revised code. They're not in your administrative code. So without a format, then that means you can kind of operate freely however you want. It's a good and a bad thing. So last year, I've been in this position almost 2 years. December 27 will make it 2 years. We did a national scan of government-run offices so that we can not reinvent the wheel, but if we could pick up a blueprint and run with it, I'm always happy to. Unfortunately, we weren't able to find that, but we did find some good mottos and good things we wanted to be able to pick up and include as we change the design of this office and what it does. We're primarily a funder. That means we don't provide direct service. I'm not working with an individual case to case. I have capacity of a $2.6 million budget, and I have 6 staff members. So when you hear that the county loves reentry and they support reentry, does that sound like a county that loves reentry and supports reentry, right? I know this is being recorded, so don't get me get fired. But it's honest and it's transparent, right? It's a government that slaps Band-Aids on things. And so I have to think about, as someone in a appointed position who has a charge to make sure you utilize government dollars the most effective way, what's the best way to do that? So we have about 9 programs and services that we fund in totality. Most of those programs and services on an annual basis, calendar year, can support upwards of 150 individuals with the exception of North Star's Resource Center. So that's not a whole lot, and there probably won't be a whole bunch of additional money that's going to come to me in resources for a multitude of reasons, and some I actually don't disagree with. So with that being said, then how do I strategize the best use of a small pot of money? How do you scale it? Well, it's to bring people together. It's to stop having agencies fight and compete against each other, to figure out how you're going to work together, and so we can figure out where the gaps that lie within this system. And you have to focus on a dual realities, both a micro and a macro system. Because I'll have my client that's telling me, or you'll have reentry or returnees telling, hey, I need this now. So I'm glad you want to focus on the barriers and the policies and CQEs and collateral sanctions, but that means nothing to the person that's returning home today with nothing. And so I get that. And because of that, we have to focus on dual realities, because at a systematic level, at its highest level, we understand how all those things, including voting today, has a huge impact on the very essence of what they're talking about, right? So you have to be able to pull all those things together. So I'm going to talk about 3 quick things that are going on before I pass the mic, and then we can kind of feel free to ask as many questions later as you like or figure out ways to get involved. So the first thing, and I have somebody in the back, kind of raise your hand. She was a part of this project. I'm not sure if she's still with us or not. But the first thing is to do an asset map. So this office has been in existence about 9 years and has never had an asset map. We don't know what exists. I always say probably the first meeting I've ever had with Tim, and it comes off kind of rude, but it's true. The good thing about reentry is that everybody loves reentry, which means you get a lot of support for reentry. The bad thing about reentry is that everybody loves reentry. So why do I say that? Because every time I turn around, it's a new program or a project popping up. The right hand doesn't speak to the left. That makes for a very ineffective, silo and fragmented system, where all you have are pockets of programs that some may be effective, some not so effective, and they don't even know that they're ineffective. You have faith-based organizations who've been doing this for years. They're totally left out of it when government comes in. And so you have to be able to wrap your arms around those things, and it's very hard to get a hold around something and analyze the gaps when every time you turn around, something else new is popping up, and you have no system structure to figure out what that looks like and how these things are being filtered in. So that's the first thing. The second thing is we're hiring a consultant to come in from Cincinnati who's going to work with us on doing a community system-wide plan. Now, to be a part of that planning process, you only have to show up at the Leadership Coalition. We still meet bi-monthly. The coalition has been in existence actually before the office. It was the coalition's recommendation to create a government model or government-ran Office of Reentry. And so from that lens, this person is coming in with an equitable lens. They do strategic planning with an equitable focus, because we just talked about the underlining fact, right? I don't want to focus on what we've focused on over the last 9 years. And what happens is you'll get a group of leaders or stakeholders in a room, and one is going to tell you that it's all about workforce, and one is going to tell you it's all about homelessness, because these are the sectors that they focus in, when it's really all about everything, because you have the chicken or the egg argument. You're dealing with individuals. And so what's usually birthed out of those kind of arguments are more programs. And it's not that programs are important. They're critical to the system, but I just told you I'll never get the money to scale them. So what we have to figure out is how do we incentivize them to collectively work together in these dual realities. And that means you can no longer attack the issue of transition. So I don't want to attack reentry, which is just a definition. It's just the definition of a transition of someone leaving a correctional institution and coming back into a community. I want to attack the real issue, right? Most of you haven't been to REI, but they talk about the difference between the groundwater and the fish that die. Why do the fish keep dying? But we always look at, let's fix the fish. No, let's fix the water. So the water would mean that we're focused on the structural racism and the generational poverty that keeps producing mass incarceration, which ultimately produces a system of recidivism. And so programs fix recidivism. But how I need to do this from both lenses, I need to be able to try to attack both as the holder. And certainly I can't do it on my own. So we invite you all, we extend that invitation when it's time to create this community-wide plan. And the third thing, last but not least, so I talked about a limited amount of resources, but we did get lucky. So we wrote a federal grant, and it's not a whole lot of money, but when I think about the things that we should support, to give you some illustrative examples, it is actually a systems-wide grant. So it allows us to spend a year with some of our community partners, which we'll also do through Leadership Coalition. We identified a couple key areas, and we want to use the experts in these areas. I don't know anything about a workforce program other than 100,000-foot level. When you hear her speak, you're going to be blown away, right? That's her expertise. But what I do know is reentry. What I do know is convening. What I do know is government work and service and how we should utilize that. So you have to figure out what's your expertise and pull it together. Stop crossing across lanes. Trust that the person to the right of you knows what they're doing. So that's the opportunity to do so. We're going to bring in community development this time. So I'm not going to ask you to tell me about a transitional housing program, which is effective. We have one. They're great. But I want you to tell me how you're going to produce a community that's better so people can thrive in it and they don't have to catch the bus to Seoul when they get a job. I want you to tell me about that. So we're going to use people in these spaces to plan us with these resources that we have, and then they're going to put in dollars as well and resources as they seek them throughout this year. We're also going to start a legal clinic, and the partnership actually is with Case Western Reserve University. That legal clinic claim is a direct result of Tim's research. Tim shared with me what Damien and himself did when they went on these listening tours. And so generally when you work with the attorney one time, you go in and do a tour, they're going to tell you, I don't have a house. I don't got no job. Can you help me get one of the two? But if you go back and listen to a reoccurring theme, you'll start to hear things about court-ordered debt. You'll start to hear child support and all the debt that's been slapped up on them and incurred. You'll start to hear about driver's license, all those things that may not seem like a lot to us in our day-to-day. But imagine somebody that had these issues. Now you had the issue of a felony. Now you've been incarcerated and you can't find no job. How am I supposed to pay that debt? And, you know, if either I would decide not to be active in my child's life at all, or I'll decide to sell dope again. One of the two. I mean, it's not, the solutions aren't that difficult for them because that's generally what they choose to do. So you might say, well, why do a legal clinic? You're just reinventing the wheel. We have legal aid. So that's untrue, right? Each legal aid gets the opportunity to do something by design different. Every single one. And it's usually transformed by who funds them. Is my time up? All right. So with our legal aid here, where they do a great job, they have a small staff, and a lot of the times what happens is they have a lot of red tape because they have something called FPLs, Federal Poverty Guidelines. If you don't fall within that FPL, you cannot be served by legal aid because of their funding source. And so what a law school allows you to do, I have to think about, I'm a government service worker, right? Your tax dollars. I have to think about sustainability and fidelity to a model. So being a law school graduate, you have to do free work. And so if I onboard 2 full-time attorneys, what I can get is free labor, though, for the exception of forever, as long as it's law students. You're going to have to come in and do some free work. So, and it has no red tape. There'll have to be some criteria around it, obviously, but we don't have to worry about someone that's paycheck to paycheck that's just $3 over the FPL and all of a sudden you can't get serviced. And instead of looking at what we typically look at, you know, obviously there's some changes going on with CQEs and expungements, but we can also look at, you know, the impact of some child support debt and other debt that we really need to hone in on to help, you know, help them have a better or successful return into the community. And last but not least, another kind of illustrative example of that is some employer engagement strategies that we have going on with our Department of Development. So I told you that there are 8 divisions that are Health and Human Services. We're one of those divisions. We never reach across our aisle. So when people think about, reentry in its systems, they probably thinking I'm talking about the corrections institution, they're talking about our, our jails, our prisons, and social services. But that's not your system. Those are parts of your system. Reentry stretches across everything, as you just heard Peter give an example of. But without data to support that, or a person like Peter to come in and talk about it, they don't listen to us. They just see it as, oh, you're just a little poor social worker, shut up, crying and whining. So Peter gives an illustrative example of how it impacts all and what systems we're talking about and how it flows across them. And so with these strategies, Bashar and Towards Employment has done some technical assistance forums with employers to strategize around how do you get through how do you utilize the incentives, how do you get around the barriers, why is this a good idea for the economic future of the city of Cleveland and Cuyahoga County as a whole. And so I could talk forever, but I'm going to pass it on because you guys shut up.
Well, how do I follow that? Should have put me first, Tim. So I would start with, I'll tell you a little bit about what Towards Employment does, and then also a little bit about why this work, particularly around collateral sanctions, is important to us. So Towards Employment is a workforce development organization. So our lens definitely is workforce, and we do provide program services. So we offer programs, and our programs are geared towards helping individuals prepare for a job, get a job, keep a job, and then advance into a career. And so our focus really is focusing on knowing that the first job someone gets may not be their last job, and that first job probably will have insufficient income, but how do we work with individuals for a longer period of time and help them see that first job as a building block into a career, and also how do we work with individuals to continue skill building so that they're better positioned for advancement opportunities later on. So we've done a lot of work with University Hospital and Metro Health. We also work with a lot of manufacturers, and then we also own a bakery, which is a social enterprise bakery, so we hire our own graduates, and then we also partner with Youth Opportunities Unlimited to help co-manage the Young Adult Resource Center for Cuyahoga County's Ohio Means Jobs. So we have a couple different areas, some programming that is very sector focused, such as manufacturing and healthcare. We have programming that's very geared towards specific populations, so that would be the young adults, and then our biggest program does happen to be reentry. About 2/3 of the individuals we serve on any given year do have some sort of criminal record. And so we are involved actively in thinking through policies that impact individuals with criminal records. My role in the organization is to think about policies and systems and how those interact with workforce development and human services. So that's my role in the organization. I don't actually do any one-on-one, except when they need volunteer mock interviewers. That's pretty much the extent of my work, even though more recently we've been doing a lot of work around voter engagement. So everyone knows if you have a criminal record in the state of Ohio, you can vote. You can vote as long as you are not incarcerated for a felony. So that even means that if you are in jail with a misdemeanor charge or conviction, you can vote. Now, there's a whole lot of complexities in how you arrange for a jail to be a polling location. There's some special forms you have to fill out. So most folks in jail probably are not voting, but you can vote. And the ACLU, and I believe another organization you've worked with, NOVA, and then Cleveland Votes, has done a lot of work around voting, and even Towards Employment, we operate out of 2 jail facilities. We have staff that are operating out of 2 jail facilities, not the downtown jail. That jail's on the struggle bus right now. They've got some issues. So we're not operating out of that one, but the Euclid and Bedford facility, which is really a facility that's individuals who are finishing out a sentence. We can have another conversation another day on why we use jails as a tool for people to finish sentences. Not sure that's a great thing, but we do it in Cuyahoga County, and we do have work readiness program embedded there. And I had an opportunity to actually talk with some of the individuals we're serving there about their voting rights, making sure that they were filling out the special form that allows for them to vote while they are in the jail facility. There's there's a form that you have to fill out, and then also educating them about issue 1, because I worked on the Issue 1 campaign and I can do that. So we spent time talking about how they can vote, and then also making sure that they know when they come to Towards Employment that we are registering voters. So it's embedded in our programming that we're educating folks about their right to vote. And so that's pretty much the extent of my interaction, though, is educating around voting rights and then also mock interviewing. So why we care about this issue. So I described to you that we really have an advancement lens, so we're focused on helping people access careers. And in Northeast Ohio in particular, your career options you have with a criminal record are limited. So you saw on Peter's slide that a number of the jobs that were restricted with collateral sanctions were in the medical field and in education. And so when you think about what are the driving industries in Northeast Ohio, so it could be, if you're in a different part of the state, there might be other driver industries, and so you have more opportunities to compete for those jobs because there isn't a legal restriction saying if you have X criminal conviction, you're precluded from X type of employment or license. But in Northeast Ohio, with a good share of our jobs in industries that have high barriers to entry, reducing collateral sanctions is important to us. So one, there's a number of state laws that say if you have a criminal record or in particular a felony, you can't work in the healthcare industry. There's also some federal laws. So it has a lot to do with Medicaid, Medicare reimbursement, where if you have certain criminal backgrounds, you're ineligible to work with patients that are Medicare or Medicaid eligible. So there's some federal collateral sanctions, and then there's a whole lot of state collateral sanctions. Peter also gave the example around Johns Hopkins. And if you were to compare Johns Hopkins in Maryland and their operations in DC, they have different numbers of individuals with criminal records working for them. In Maryland, there are very few collateral sanctions in their Maryland Revised Code. In Washington, D.C., there's a ton of collateral sanctions saying that if you have X criminal record, you cannot work in the healthcare industry. And so Maryland is blessed that they don't have as few, they have fewer barriers to entry legally for individuals to work in their facility in Maryland, which also leads us to why that is so critical that, you know, as a state that actually has few barriers to entry also has very few incidents. And Johns Hopkins sees their role in the community as being a partner, and it just so happens, not unlike the community we live in, that their hospital is surrounded by neighborhoods that have a disparate impact, where individuals are high rate of poverty, surrounded by neighborhoods where lots of people are returning from incarceration. And so for them, it was important for them to be a good community partner. Now, if you look at Cleveland Clinic, University Hospital, and Metro, they are also in neighborhoods where there is a high number of individuals with criminal records. And I can say, because Towards Employment has a partnership with Metro Health and University Hospital, that in almost every workshop that we've had since we've started working with them a few years ago, UH in particular, there has been someone with a minor criminal record in our workshop that was placed at University Hospital. Now, they don't want to advertise it because they don't want to get sued, but they do selectively hire individuals with criminal records. And the problem is that it's not at scale, and it's very few individuals, and it's a limited number of convictions. So when we start thinking about collateral sanctions, it comes in a couple of forms. So from a workforce development perspective, tell me if I'm going over time. There's a couple things you need to get a job. And so the first need would be you have to have some sort of skill. So you need technical training. You need access. So that's transportation. You have to get there. You might need a credential. So a skill is your ability to do something with or without. A skill can be aptitude. A credential is some sort of authority saying that you have X number of credits to participate in a certain occupation. And then also advancement opportunities, which has a lot to do with internal hiring and internal promotion and a supervisor taking notice of you. And so if you have a criminal record, I would kind of put people in two camps. There are those that have criminal records that are highly skilled, and these legal barriers are getting in the way of them accessing employment. So towards employment, there are some tools that can help someone like that. And one being the Certificate of Qualification for Employment. It was called CQE. It was a tool created in Senate Bill 337 in 2012. It's a highly underutilized tool for a whole host of reasons when we think about how disgusting our system is. There's depending on what county you live in, your access to this tool is different, and it's on the onus of the individual to get one of these tools, and you have to go because it carries legal weight. So that's what makes it important, and probably one of the best certificates out there in the country is that if you have one of these, it gives employers negligent hiring protection. And there's legal weight to it because you do have to go through the court. But you can imagine that if you were someone with a criminal record, you're not really begging to go back through the court system. And a judge can deny your petition. And there's fees associated with your application. And if you're denied, those fees don't go away. And so there's a whole host of issues that have to be addressed for that tool to be viable. But what? The filing fee amount, $250, but it actually differs by county. So yes. So depending on the county, though, it could be different. So either way, if you're looking for a job, I'm pretty sure it's because you're looking for income, and so you just don't have $250 lying around unless you have what I call unreported income strategies, which some of I know our participants got some unreported income strategies because I'm like, we have an unpaid workshop, okay, and so I'm just like, how are you surviving? You know what? I don't want to know. Don't tell me. We're just gonna act like that. We don't have to talk about that. We're gonna get you to the point where you do have. You can claim EITC or file taxes and be part of the tax base. So that's a barrier for someone who I would say is skilled, but there's a legal barrier, a collateral sanction keeping them from accessing employment. We also know on the other side that there's a whole lot of folks who don't have skills that are coming out of our prison system. And I attribute that to failures of other systems that contributed to those individuals ending up in the criminal justice system in the first place. So we know that we build prisons based on third grade reading rates. Well, CMSD's report card came out recently. We're really struggling on individuals passing the third grade reading test. And so we are actively producing children who are not reading at a third grade level today. My dad volunteers. He's a retired administrator in Bolton Elementary School, and he is like, these kids are reading at maybe a first grade level, maybe, and they're halfway through the school year. And he says, and they're having trouble learning in their other classes. And what they do is they act out, not because they're bad, but because they're frustrated and they're bored and they're sitting in a classroom not understanding what the teacher is talking about. And so then that's the school to prison pipeline. So they start being sent to the office. They start acting out more, or they get some sort of diagnoses that the ODD, oppositional defiant disorder, it's like the catch-all disorder for young black men. And so what happens is these kids are now being filtered into the juvenile justice system, and then they end up in the adult criminal justice system. And so we have systems that fail our children, and then once they become adults, they're criminals, and we demonize them. But either way, these folks are coming home. 90% of people incarcerated are coming home, and they might be coming home having not gained the skills because our systems pass them along. And so not only do they have a criminal record, but they also are struggling with skills. And so from a workforce development perspective, that means we have to layer on academic remediation. And so also those individuals are going to pick up a number of other barriers to employment. So one, access to credit. Or access to Pell Grants. So for a lot of technical training programs, you need to be able to pay, you use a Pell Grant to be able to help cover some of the costs. Well, you're going to struggle to get that if you have a criminal record, particularly depending on what community you live in. Or if you want to enroll in Tri-C, and let's say you had already enrolled, but you didn't finish the program and you still owe Tri-C, well, now you can't enroll in another program that's going to help you gain employment because you already owe Tri-C and you're unable to pay it because you can't get a job. And so this is creating this system where people are trapped. And then layer on to that, now there's all these legal barriers to you being able to access employment. So from a workforce development perspective, it's our job to help untangle those. And there's lots of programs out there to help deal with some of that, but most of them, as Crystal noted, is that they're siloed. And so you're running around trying to piece together systems that don't talk to each other, and then tack on the fact that there is bias in hiring. So there's definitely bias. So we were doing a look back of some of our graduates who are white and who are black. And we find that our participants with criminal records who are white will get, it's not that they get job offers at different rates because we have strong placement across the board, but their starting wage is different. And so we are doing something about that. We have a grant from the Annie Kesey Foundation, and our career coaches next year are going to be going to some sort of like racial equity seminar that's going to help coach them on how to have conversations with employers, because it's sensitive, right? Like, how do we tell our employers who we're like saying, please hire our people with criminal records, that like, and guess what, you're also being kind of racist. Like how do you have that conversation? But we've got to figure out how to have it, right? Because we know we have a white gentleman with little experience in manufacturing, criminal record, who got placed at a very notable employer in Cleveland at $17 an hour. And we had two other black participants also placed with that same employer, notable employer, it's an employer partner of ours, $2 less, but all had more experience. And they all had criminal backgrounds. So why is that? Same occupation, because we all placed them in the same jobs. All, these two gentlemen had manufacturing experience prior to being incarcerated. So why is it that this young man, not saying that he shouldn't get $17 an hour, I'm actually glad he got $17 an hour. I just want my other two folks to get $17 an hour. And so then you start talking about bias in hiring, that is along racial lines, and the wage disparities that come along with it. And that all peels back to what happens to these individuals when they're trying to support their families. And when individuals aren't working, it doesn't just hurt them, it hurts our neighborhoods, particularly because individuals are often coming back to some of the same neighborhoods. And so the economic and political power of that neighborhood is diminished if a whole swath of that community is not able to access family sustaining wages, because that changes the tax base. And when the tax base changes, it means fewer resources that go back into our schools. And then basically we're underfunding schools that we know by data and history are going to continue failing our black children, and they're just going to end up in the criminal justice system. And so that's how that cycle happens. And so that we care about collateral sanctions because it's just one more layer that keeps holding our participants back from being able to participate in the economy, take care of their families, and also build up their neighborhoods. So I think that's it for me.
First of all, I want to thank Crystal and Bashir, because of the work that they do. It has created a different narrative and a space for someone like me to exist in and find opportunity in. And a lot of people don't know, like particularly with Crystal, this sister is standing up against many systems, and she's speaking truth to power. And then you have people like Bashir, who, as I call atomic energy, small but atomic, nuclear, and because of the work that y'all do, it makes a difference, because this is algebra. There's one part of the equation that's dealing with the changing of systems, of policies, procedures, practices. And then there's that ground level where souls like me exist in, where when Peter shows data on the board, I deal with that data and with the human toll of that data day to day. I work for community relations, outreach. I do what we call violent interruption, disruption, intervention, prevention, redirection. So we're working with gang members. We're working with returned citizens. I am proud to say that Initially, we were responding to notifications of people being shot. We go out to the scene, take a look at who the bad actors are tied to the tensions, and use that information to come back and figure out where we need to mediate at and who we need to mediate with. I extended this to returned citizens because my director, Grady Stevenson, said, look, we're tired of being reactive. We want to be proactive. We want to get in front of the violence. So we're tired of responding. And so in responding, we recognized that, one, we had to deeper dive into the communities and build relationships, not just with the bad actors and the people who participate in these alternative economies, you know, because they have to find a way to exist and survive. Unfortunately, often at the cost of the neighborhood and people, you know, but building relationships with them. But we also had to build relationships with people in the community, with professionals, with employment agencies, and the like. Thank you. And so we had to build relationships with them so that if I go into a neighborhood and I ask somebody to put down this gun or put down this dope package, I have to have an opportunity for them to pick up. Thanks, B. Yeah. Thank you, brother. I appreciate you. Never lose your cool. Never lose your cool. Thank you. I have to have something, a deliverable for them to pick up. And so this is interesting because, just real quick, Peter, you had mentioned systems, and we hear this, systems. And this is interesting because we talk a lot about this in my work. We call it structural violence. Thank you, Elder. We call it structural violence. And just real briefly, structural violence are those policies, laws, practices, and procedures that systemically bar mostly communities of colors and poor people from equitable access to opportunities. Out of them systems, you see things like mass incarceration and the cradle to the school prison pipeline, and the laws that exist around that, like such as the crack laws, where you got caught with a certain amount of crack versus powder, you did more time. Who most likely to have that? The criminalization of the poor. Bashir talked about the correlation between third grade literacy scores and incarceration. In those systems, there's an overlay, such as when you look at those schools where they're performing poorly, there's also high levels of lead content, which my 2-year-old son, Caleb, suffer from right now. Found out 3 weeks ago. So that in these urban centers, part of that systemic piece is the neglect, the urban blight, the lack of representation that causes what we call toxic environments, which creates toxic stress, which this chronic toxic stress that manifests in our children and how it plays out behaviorally. So that we were talking about the classrooms where kids are not being challenged and, you know, they're being misdiagnosed. We also are discovering that these children and young adults who exist in these toxic-filled environments are also a cocktail of chemicals when they come into these classroom settings, because we know what stress do to adults, right? Hypertension, high blood pressure. What is it doing to our youngin' who are suffering the same thing while they are still developing? So when this young soul's autonomic system is aroused and they have norepinephrine running through their veins and adrenaline because of the violence they see at home or in their community, the echoes of gunshots, the optics of urban blight, decay, neglect, and then they sit in a classroom setting, and because they're a cocktail of chemicals, they can't sit still, so they're moving around. They're a little overly aggressive because they overreact to perceived threats. They're easily agitated, and the teachers say, this kid has a behavioral problem, so they want to put them on a new generation of Ritalin and the like. These are medical things. These are medical issues. So it was interesting when Crystal said how the Office of Reentry falls under Health and Human Services. That was very interesting because there's a reframing that's going on right now in our city of violence, reframing it as a health issue. because the people, the souls who have been weaponized in these toxic environments and are suffering from the ravages of it, and the overlay of lead poisoning, which also in high concentrations can cause maladaptive behavioral issues, and prone them to violence, let alone to arrested cognitive development, which when, as a side note, when I was incarcerated and I went through law block training and I was a reader aide. I would help people read, especially in preparations for their GED test. 85% of people in the ODRC are functioning illiterate. When you got this high number, this is systems at play. So in the community, when I'm working one-on-one with these weaponized souls, with a young man who hides his pistol before he goes into JFK, and then as soon as he come out of school, he gets his pistol, and I'm like, man, why you got your tool on you? And he's saying to me, oh, gee, you don't understand, man, I need it, it's for protection. And I say, against who? And he look around, say, everybody. And to see it in his eyes, like this ain't a front. This ain't a front, like he's serious. That is a snapshot of the state of our community and just how dire the situation is. So when my esteemed friends and colleagues invite you in to be a part of this, this is a serious invitation because it's going to take a village. That was interesting, Peter, when you talked about the medical field. 2 days ago, well, last week, I talked to her today too, but last week I had a young lady referred to me who did 4 years in prison because she said she took a case for her sister. She got a assault with a deadly weapon. She did 4 years for it. She made good use of her time. She came home and got a bachelor's of business administration, general management at Bryan and Stratton College. She got a medical assistant in phlebotomy, if I said that right, at Remington phlebotomy at Remington College. She has a bachelor's degree in business. Got all these great functional and technical skill sets. And she's working in her field, and after 6 months of working there, budgeting her life off of what she's earning, they decide to do a background check and take her job from her. Now, she's on the phone with me, and it's very interesting because she has child support against her because while she was in prison, her children's father took possession of the kids. Now, she's on child support, and it was very interesting that mostly I deal with men in this. This is only the second time I've dealt with a woman. And then I realized that this is deeper. Men, we process differently. But a woman having her children ripped from her, that's a different, deeper kind of wound and a tear. And so this woman is pouring out to me over the phone. She's upset. She's crying. I'm like, damn. So I'm trying to tie her into an employment opportunity. And she immediately sends me her resume, and I'm pulling it down, and I'm like, wow, I wanted to make sure I'm bringing it here today because, Bashir, I'm going to be giving this to you, so giving it to you, her name and number and all of that is on there. I wanted her to come. I wanted to actually give up some of my time for her to tell her story because stories are very important. And Tim hears me say this all the time. We tell story in the way we live our lives. So when you see some of these young weaponized souls out here, there's a story behind it. There's a process that weaponizes them. And it behooves us to, if we can, be present to hear the story. Sometimes it'll come across in a disturbing way and we have to be patient, but there's a story there. And we have to understand these stories. For me, I feel a great sense of humility to operate in these spaces because of many of my peers don't enjoy these type of opportunities. I worked very hard for them while I was incarcerated. I was very intentional and strategic how I moved through space and time in my journey. but there was also the hand of my Most High in this. And so a lot of I haven't suffered what a lot of my peers endure day to day. So I sort of have to be mouthpiece for them. And so whenever I come into these type of spaces, we try to put flesh and bone and souls behind the data and the stories. This is something that a space that Tim invited me into some years back. And when we would do presentations on what we have found in our interviews, which Crystal highlighted, about the money-making plays that go on with putting them on the monitors and the court costs and restitution and some of the things that this bail bond reform piece is trying to take on. Tim would put them numbers out there and talk about the systems and the light and do it in his eloquent way, and then I would have an opportunity to put the flesh and blood and bone on it and the soul in it. And so we have a whole village of children that's being lost, that's being swallowed up in the system, that's being neglected. And in the work that I do, I see this, and the men that I supervise now in this space, they see it. And I remember reading the Bible once, and it said, "My people shall perish for a lack of knowledge." I added to that. Part of what's going on right now is that they're suffering from a lack of imagination, because the situation has become so dire, and in the backdrop of a national discourse that's so polarizing, that they are dying for a lack of imagination because they cannot imagine themselves out of their condition. Now imagine how hard that is for those of us who go in and in our own ways try to minister, and they can't imagine themselves out of their state. If you can't see it, you can't be it. And that's the danger, because the system, this is designed. Baltazar Gracian says a shrewd archer may or may not kill two people with a single arrow, but a wise man with a shrewd strategy can kill even babies in the womb. We seeing that now. So part of the work that we do demands motivation. Even those that go out there, we have to pull motivation out of our soul every day to motivate others that we're working with to see a vision of themselves outside of this, and then to bring the resources and the extra hands and the village support around them to enable them in that process. That's what it takes. And it takes vision. And it's hard work, because we all deal with life and life issues, and we have to compartmentalize that and get out there, do what we do. But this is an invitation. You know, we push information to you, but now we pull from y'all to figure out, like, we need you at the table, we need your DNA, we need your energy. To some of the students that we talk to in classrooms, we remind you that you are our tomorrow. And you have to sit at the table, because if you don't have a seat at the table, you're on the menu. So I yield to our audience.
Yeah. Okay, let's bring Peter back up, and we have about a half an hour left, and have some questions. Hi, Asia. It's good to see you.
Damien.
Yes.
Damien, when's your book signing?
My book's still being written, man. Okay.
Oh, we have a mic here. Is this on? Yeah. Oh, okay. I don't have more exercise. Line up and ask your questions.
you don't have a question, I wanted to, so we won't use the young lady's name for the resume that Damien handed to me, but she is the perfect example of like why collateral sanctions are problematic and how it's an economic problem for Northeast Ohio. So I'm just glancing at it while I've been up here. And so one, she got a Associate of Applied Science degree as a medical administrative assistant from Bryan and Stratton College in 2014. I'm assuming her incarceration happened before 2014. I'm looking at her resume. There's a gap in her employment before then. So she should not, whoever was at Bryan and Stratton College should have looked up her background, because you have to check the box when you apply to any college. I mean, that's a whole nother issue. We're moving the box, but we know that most colleges do have that box on a job application. And so they forgot to tell her that because of her criminal record, she's not going to be able to get a job as a medical assistant due to the nature of her criminal record. And so someone should have told her that. And so now she's spent money, because Bryan and Stratton, I believe, is a for-profit college, so she wasn't getting a Pell Grant or anything like that. She wasn't getting public dollars for that. So they forgot to tell her, so she's expended dollars getting a credential where she's not actually going to be able to put it to use. That's one breakdown. Now, she could be eligible for a CQE, because she might be eligible for a CQE, but then there's going to be we already talked about how there's a whole bunch of issues in resolving and getting one of those. And she does have a lot of medical experience. And so particularly on the administrative side, and that is one of the growing industries. So Metro Health and University Hospital desperately need folks who can do medical coding, and her skill set is primed for, with a little bit, like a month or two of training, she probably could excel in that type of role, which does have like a family sustaining wage and a career pathway associated with it. And so she would definitely benefit from a reduction in a collateral sanction in state law saying that she'd be able to work in this industry, and those hospitals would benefit from her. So we always talk about this as if we're by removing a collateral sanction, we're doing some favor for these folks. No, we're doing a favor for these hospitals who can't fill these open positions, because they can't grow if they don't have skilled talent. And this is a skilled person who's not able to work in that field because of her criminal record. And then there's probably a story behind this criminal record. And when we talk about how individuals, again, listen to season 3 Serial podcast, you see how individuals interact with this criminal justice system. And it's like, should that person really have gotten 4 years? Should that person really have said they were taking a plea deal and said they were guilty? Should that really have happened? And so you have a person who's now caught up, and everybody loses. She's losing because she's not able to pay this child support for her kids, and the hospitals are losing someone that could add value to their company. So, and the community. So we're all losing by not allowing this woman to be able to work, and it would really help. I mean, if we just could remove a barrier in our state law, everybody could win.
Well, yes. So my name is Milan Sullivan. One, I wanted to thank every single last one of you all for the work that you do. I am passionate about changing the different systems that we have through personal experience as well as my profession. So I'm a therapist. I work with men and women coming out of federal prison. And so my question to you all, for every single last one of you, is how can we support specifically what you all do, as well as in the, I guess, the macro and the micro way? So like, are there specific committees? Are there specific outreach events? Are there specific things that we can do leaving here to help you and support you all in the work that you do on a regular basis?
So I can tell you that the agency that you work for, community assessment, is actually a part of this new federal award we have. One of the things we did not mention is the servicing of post-incarceration trauma, just like any other PTSD. So they go through this experience, and if you guys have seen some of the documentaries about what happens in a jail or a prison, and then you're just gonna come home and be normal. So I might have been raped. I might have had the threat of rape. I might have been beaten. I might have been jumped. I might have been disconnected from family. I might have been isolated. I'm going to come home and be normal. So CATS, Community Assessment and Treatment Services, like she just stated, is a behavioral health organization that stands for substance abuse and mental health. And they are on this award to start providing some of that post-incarceration trauma. So at a very micro level, that's where you start. And if anyone else in the audience works at a behavioral health organization, no one else that I know of in Cuyahoga County does it. I worked for the Adams Board for many years out of my public service career. So if you want to encourage people to contact our office and think about how they can start doing this, it would be amazing. And then at a systems level, please join us at the Leadership Coalition when it's time to issue that invitation for the community-wide strategy. So it may not be Mr. Scalish, and it doesn't have to. I'd rather have a person with the passion than a person with the title. So that's my 2 cents.
Sure. So I'll go quickly here. I think a couple ideas. I mean, one I would just encourage everybody to reflect upon in their roles, whether it's as a student, whether it's as a a professor, business person, where we all come from. Think about where you have opportunities to shift resources, shift your time in directions that can move this picture here. I think there's opportunities that every individual has to be creative with where they spend their time, how they allocate their resources, personal, professional, financial, and thinking deeply about where you have opportunities to shift some behavior is one thing. I would just generally, specific to what we're talking about tonight, I think from my perspective, opportunities to continue to educate. I mean, I think even, right, you're seeing educational institutions that are training people for jobs that they ultimately cannot have. There's a lot of education that needs to go on in this space. So I think that's one thing. If you work at an employer, happy to consider what you do as an employer, learn about your practices. Are there ways that they can shift? If you're a student, how do you think about integrating what you hear tonight into some potential work that you're doing here at the university? I think there's a lot of ways to integrate individually, and happy to chat with folks afterwards more as well.
So I'd say in terms of how you can support, I think from there has to be some public pressure on our General Assembly to do a review of collateral sanctions. We've been down this road before. Remember in 2012, we did a review of collateral sanctions. So we removed a few, but it was like super minor. It was like for truck driving and barbers and Senate Bill 337. And that was needed. So I'm like, good small baby step. And so it was just, it was a baby step. That's all it was. And so probably there's going to come a point in time in the next year or so that there's going to be some pressure to reduce collateral sanctions again. And so that's when we probably need calls to your elected officials to say, please support that. Please have a review and please draft legislation that will introduce the removal of some laws that are not necessary. And then I say there's also pressure on employers. So right now, employers are very afraid to hire someone with a record, whether there's a law or not, because they feel like they're going to be liable. And there has to be some pressure on employers to say, one, that's actually not likely to happen. And there's some really good research from the National Institute of Justice that says after a certain period of time, the likelihood for someone to reoffend is lower than the general population's likelihood of committing a new crime. And so you're probably better off. And so we have to really provide some pressure to employers and also give them cover when they decide to maybe have courage amongst their peers, but also doing the right thing. Like, let's not make the right thing hard for them, because we know that they probably won't do it if it's hard.
Lastly, everything they just said, and the hookup. So in Cleveland, as it is in many places, oftentimes it's who you know first, then what you know. So sometimes just serving as a reference for somebody. I will be the first one in the interest of transparency to say that every opportunity I've enjoyed is because somebody put their name on. I had to build that relationship and have that transfer of trust, but they put their name on. That's why when I have a transfer of trust with somebody, I put my name on them for whatever it's worth, and I bring them into spaces where we can broker introductions. So in answer to your question, just to be part of what I call the friendship, and sometimes you can have somebody, like, real briefly, they said that with a murder case, because I have a murder conviction, you can never work with kids. And I interviewed up at John Adams High School to work with Joyce Hood, the Youth Knowledge Program, which was based in John Adams. And when they went through my resume, he said, "Man, I want to hire you. I got strong references, but I mean, you did a long time." And I said, "Well, I'm glad you brought that up because, in fact, I have 20 years of direct carceral experience. I'm an authority on what not to do and why not to do it. I have a PhD in consequences. And who better to impart that to these youth than one who done lived it, bled it, breathed me? But because I had people to put their name, we was able to defy the gravity of that situation. So if I have good friends and I bring somebody who's creme de la creme, who done demonstrated, and like I said, I'd like to introduce you to this soul here, and you just help take them into a space, we serving God, so just keep that in mind."
Yeah, my name is James Page, and I have more of a comment than a question, just to keep the conversation going. I'm a member of the African Wisdom Circle. The African Wisdom Circle meets at the coffee shop, the coffee house here on Cases campus from 11 to 1 every Tuesday. Everybody in this room is invited. We solve the problems of the world every Tuesday at 11, and then come out and figure we got to come back and do it again. So you can come anytime you want to. And I would like to suggest that all of us read a book by Khalil Muhammad called The Criminalization of Blackness. And it deals with how black people have been criminalized in this country from about the last part of the 19th century all the way up through now. And that's one of the three major gorillas in the room that nobody wants to deal with in terms of the economic, as the report, Two Tomorrows report talked about why we're so sluggish in the Northeast Ohio area. We don't want to deal with the racial issue and the white supremacy issue that keeps this area depressed economically. Khalil Muhammad talks about how from Jane Addams, and then I think it was a report done in Chicago in '52, and the famous Kerner report in '68, all the way up through, and we did a thing this summer with the Glenville thing with Carl Stokes' 5 pillars. The same problems that were existing 50 years ago are existing now. But you get some information. Knowledge is power. You can get some information if you read that book. I think that book is just as important as a new Jim Crow. Thank you.
Good evening. I don't know, do I have to say my name? Because to me, it's not even important. Who we are is what we are and what we do. But I want to thank you for each and every one of you for the work you do. And just thank everyone in here for even having the heart to come here and to talk about it. I just came from a Christian Community Development Conference in Chicago. John Perkins, I don't know if you guys have heard of him, but he's an 88-year-old man on his way preparing to go home. But the work that he has done over the 30 years is amazing. What they are doing in Chicago, Mississippi, all over the nation. It's not just race reconciliation, but just bringing individuals and communities together. I mean, it's proven it works. Changing our enemies to be friends or neighbors, just loving, learning how to love each other even though we don't agree with each other. And to me, that's what this area needs to learn to do. Just listening to that resume, I don't even think it's her record. I used to do fostering for teen mothers, and a couple of my goddaughters went through those schools, and my biological daughter graduated Cleveland State. A lot of what they paid at those schools, they could have went to a big college like Cleveland State or whatever. To me, it's criminal, that those colleges are allowing students to come and pay astronomical amounts of money to attend, and they don't recognize those schools. Let's get real. And so to me, that's a whole nother system that we need to address, because I mean, they've done the work, they've spent the time, but they're not recognized. And so to me, I need to know, how do we go and hold these people accountable? Because that's criminal. When you can have people to go and get that kind of debt and have no opportunities. And I guarantee you, if you check their record, their success rate with people having employment couldn't be very high. So I just want to say, I'm tired. I'm tired of being tired, and I'm tired of doing little or a whole lot, but nothing's no impact. And so I'm here to listen to see how we come together and work in love, but really make some changes and hold people accountable. Because the bottom line is, America, as Billy Graham said, if we don't get it together, God gonna have to apologize to Sodom and Gomorrah. And I truly believe this is the last call. And it's not for alcohol. It's for America to get right and treat people right, because all people are God's precious people. And I'm here for some solutions to tell me, how do we hold these systems accountable? God bless you.
So you did pose a question in your great comments, and one was about, what's an opportunity to hold some of these proprietary or for-profit schools accountable. And I think Bashara has spoken to this a little bit. It's your General Assembly. They can legislate that away. And so what happens is sometimes we call those proprietary schools because I'll just tell you this. It's not likely that they didn't know she had a background. They don't care because they're a for-profit institution and it's a business. So they don't have to disclose to them the collateral sanctions, or they don't have to say, you may not be likely to get this job. It's a business. Their job is to move them through this educational transaction. And so if you don't like it, the best way to stop or enforce something upon a business is your legislators. You have to bring an issue to them. You have to have enough authority behind it to address it as an issue. You have to really get ahead of it, lobby and advocate, and then you begin to see changes. So the accountability starts at your legislation, because they're supposed to work for you, and not just the people that are on the ballot, us too. I'm not on a ballot, but I'm appointed to a position to serve you. So that means after hours, after 5, if you call. It's amazing to me when people say, oh, you answer the phone, you call me back. That's my job. So I don't know what's happening, but you have to start holding all of our feet to the fire. And that's one strategy, and probably the simplest one. It costs nothing. It's just galvanizing and mobilizing people.
It also sounds like there's some research and data there. So better understanding who's enrolling in those schools, how many of them have criminal records, and what their likelihood of success is. And then see you can probably do the same thing with Tri-C or Lorain County or any of the community colleges, and start making some comparisons who are more effective at helping individuals with records connect to work after graduation. And so there's some data there. And you can also discharge debt and sue. And so Towards Employment has legal services for our graduates, and we do that. We don't advertise it because our employers don't really like it too much. So we try and keep that on the down low. But for our graduates who are in these situations and they've accrued a lot of debt, we will sue or figure out ways to discharge the debt or come up with ways to minimize their payment plans. And so we've done that. I mean, I think we've discharged, last year, over $100,000 in debt for some of our graduates. So that can be done, but it's often on a case-by-case basis.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Indy. Nice to meet you. Hi. I see some familiar faces. Sorry, I'm having a little vision problem right now. A couple things I just wanted to say that just kind of crossed my mind. I've forgotten some, but I think, is it Bashara? Bashara? Okay. I think we met Opportunity Corridor last year. You all have the Bloom program, right? Downtown. I was really impressed with that. More people need to know about that, because I think you guys, like what's going on in here today, again, the education is what matters, and everything that's being discussed. I know some of us have been in some of the same rooms and different things going on in the community, but the more we do that, the more we educate everybody on every end. That's how things get changed. I wanted to mention a few things. One, I have a daughter who's an adult now, but when she was in chartered school, Montessori school, I got so frustrated because while she was in first grade, every time I would come pick her up, I would notice in the morning, as soon as I got there, it'd be a couple of young African-American males sitting in the hallway. By the time I came back in the evening, it was like 20 or 30. I mean, to the point they ran out of room, was all the way down the hall, all the way in, and they were in the office. And I'm like, what is going on? And eventually I got so tired of seeing it. My daughter ended up in her class, the teacher that was doing this the next year. And it was the same thing every day, every day, every day. Finally, I called a social worker. Because I said, how is it a parent, if you don't bring your kid to school, is a truant, but your child gets up, gets dressed, you feed them, put them on the bus, whatever, however to get there, and there's all these children, and then you set them up for failure by lining them up in the hallway all day, every day, all school year long. She should be prosecuted. So they came in and they did something about it. But it's just like people don't know what's going on inside doors. You drop them off and you don't pay attention. So while you're over here, and I already knew there was an incentive for young black males to not pass by third grade. So it's going on in a lot of schools. Also, my daughter was in 6th grade. I taught her to read and write by the age of 2 because I just thought it was kind of strange. Why do we wait and then throw a whole bunch of children in a room and expect one person is supposed to be dealing with it? And I felt like if she could get it, she got it. Well, it helped her in her other subjects, what I didn't realize. But also, I got a call when she was in 6th grade, and they said to me, we have a problem with your daughter. She's reading in 12th grade books. I said, are they like adult material? Like, what are you showing the 12? And this is an art school. I said, what do you have in 12th grade? They said, oh, no, it's not about their books that are inappropriate. She just needs to read on her level. I said, she is reading on her level. And if you were smart, you would take her and take the other 100 in her 6th grade and have her raise them up instead of trying to bring her down. I mean, it's everywhere, and this is not new. Also, I went to the Business of Reentry Summit a couple years ago. Unfortunately, something happened there, and I ended up in shock and had to go to the hospital in the evening. But before that happened, I went around and kind of just started talking to people that were doing culinary or had art or anyone that was there that was supposed to be in some type of program or reform or what have you. And all I kept noticing is that people couldn't look you in the eye. They kept holding their heads down. And it just really bothered me because I could pick up that vibe and feel that energy of where they just didn't feel like they were human, and I didn't like how they were feeling in the room. And then I also met this amazing young lady at a store once, and I asked her, was she the store manager, the way she was conducting herself. And she kind of called me to the side and she said, well, no, I'm not a manager because I have a record. I can't work anywhere else. And she didn't feel like she could go anywhere else. I said, well, listen, do me a favor and call me because I'm going to reach out and see if I can find some help for you. But a lot of people are afraid to do that because they just don't believe. And then I had a father who was trying to get custody of his daughter, which I thought was very unusual for a young guy in his 20s. And I sent him to the Fatherhood Initiative to try to get some support. Because he told me he had a construction, he did all these different things in his backgrounds, he'd work with uncles and all. And then I almost walked him into an employment situation, because I do find jobs for people all the time. I've sent people all the way to Japan, and I'm a disabled veteran. I get no help. I get resumes from K students. I help people as much as I can. But I got so upset because later on it turns out he didn't have a GED. And I'm like, you didn't tell me that. You know, so it's just all these things we're doing, we need to continue to do. I appreciate all of you, and I really appreciate you letting us know there's programs that exist that we didn't know, because that's the thing. We have to get all these words out to everybody. So the more you do this kind of format around the country, the more everybody starts buzzing about what's out there and what's available. Thank you.
I wanted to raise a question too. One of the things that I struggle a lot with and is that it seems that our focus on what we define as success is so much on recidivism, right? And that with returning citizens. And so what happens is that we find ourselves in these systems, and we're trying to keep people out of prison. Everybody wants to stay out of prison, of course. We're trying to look for ways to do that. So we're trying to get people into the services that they need, whether mental health services, addiction services, employment services, and so forth. And I look at, too often, and I found this with the work that Damien and I did, too often, I see a guy that's 2 or 3 years out, and he's or she has not committed another crime, so they haven't gone back to prison. And they have a job, and that job's minimum wage, 30 hours a week. They don't have any health insurance. They're still loaded up with debt. They're living with their mothers or grandmothers, and thank God for the mothers and grandmothers that are the backbones of these communities that keep people together. And you know what we call that? Success. We call that success, right? And so when we talk about systems change, it's not just about inclusion, right? If we have a system that doesn't enable people to be self-sufficient, if we're channeling people into precarious lives and precarious employment, you know? And I find myself kind of falling into that as a mentor or somebody who's doing advocacy work, and you're really trying to help people, you know, stay out of prison and stay out of the alternative economy and so forth, and that's the best we can do. And so how do we work in that system where we're trying to help people stay out of prison, help people get to get employment skills, housing, and so forth, and work to push against these systemic limitations and barriers at the same time? How do you do that?
All right, so I kind of mentioned this whole systems focus, right? Like it's really complex, and even to try to explain it in here, it's difficult to do. And this is why I continue to keep extending the invite out to you. But one of the other strategies is you have to attack the right thing in both realities. So as crazy as that sounds, it's true, which means you have a whole lot of weight on your back because it's a huge fight and it's a huge undertaking. So economic development is another strategy, and we're currently working on looking at entrepreneurship as a strategy to reentry. It's not new, it's just new to Cleveland. This is a very historic framework, the way they do things and move things. So I was just sharing with these two before we even came in today. I was fortunate to be able to talk to somebody out of Baltimore today who has a project called Mission Launch. Mission Launch is backed by Bank of America, backed by John Legend. And so what they do, they focus on the 3 R's. So not only do they look at Bandit Box for like employers or jobs, they look at Bandit Box for lending institutions. They also have a strategy in terms of like a Shark Tank model where they do some lending for entrepreneurship. Because if you don't attack the real issues, then that's how you begin to feel frustrated. If I just keep looking at reentry, then I'm looking at this stagnant thing of recidivism. But if I look at poverty and racism and how do I attack those things in this framework, then I'm pushing something different. So I'm not attacking those things anymore. I'm attacking things that combat the issue of generational, poverty, because that's the real issue, and everything else is just a stimulus of those things. That's it. Poor health, everything. If we weren't poor, REI teaches you that, right? Some of us been through REI, so we know what the real issue is and why poverty is set up the way it is systematically, and how they use race just as a pawn to kind of put us up against each other in the grand scheme of things. Because if you're white and poor and I'm black and poor, you feel a little bit better than me because you're white and poor. But you're not really any better off as we're currently seeing with our existing structure, which is why Election Day is so important today. So with that being said, you're going to focus on dual realities. When we did Reentry Week this year, we focused on the theme of not just returning, but advancing. Bashar will have a different answer because she's coming out of a workforce lens, but same thing. TE as an agency is no longer just focused on getting you a job. They're focused on getting you a job with a pathway. So you're not just staying at this $9 or $10 an hour job. I want to be able to help you create a system or structure where you can go into an apprenticeship and go from 9 to 30 at some point. So we're there. It's just such a slow process when you're dealing with government, when you're dealing in nonprofits, when you're dealing with a system itself that doesn't want you to move it and change it. So that's my answer from a government perspective. Anybody else wants to share?
I think just 2 real quick comments. One, I think it's about vision and what does success mean. It's something that we've been really focused on rethinking as a result of a lot of this work that we're doing. How do you define success, and what's a successful economy look like? I think it's a really interesting question because it sets the bar at the right level, so you're not working towards outcomes that are undesirable. For what it's worth, the vision we're coming up with is it's an economy that's continuously regenerating, that provides good jobs with rising incomes for everybody. And that gets a little bit to the holistic nature of what you were talking about, Tim. And then I think Damien's algebra equation came back to my mind as you were speaking as well. And I think thinking if you have different variables in that equation, one is systemic, and what systemic level action are you going to be undertaking? One is organizational, and as an organization, what are you advancing? And then the third potentially could be individual, and as a person living in this community, what are the actions that you're taking to affect the types of outcomes that we all want to see?
So I can speak to organizational. So, I mean, you're going to work towards what you're measuring. And so as an organization, it was actually Peter's organization that helped to fund an initiative that we got a chance to pilot that really looked at advancement. And so two of the things that we track as a result of that pilot was advancement. So we look at advancements as someone going from like a temporary job to a permanent job, someone going from part-time to full-time, someone who's now getting benefits, increases in wages, someone who's also getting better hours. So we're looking at job quality measures, increases in earnings, and also credential attainment. So we measure ourselves, we hold ourselves accountable for, are we helping individuals achieve credentials? Are those credentials going to position them for advancement? And we're tracking people for a 2 to 3 year time frame versus just 30, 60, 90 days. And so when you raise, so this is at the organizational level, so this isn't the systems level, even though we'd love it if everybody was measuring themselves that way, but organizationally we're pushing ourselves to think differently, which means we have to organize our program differently. So now we have career coaches in addition to case managers. We have a different protocol for how we follow up with individuals. We trained our career coaches to have different conversations with individuals past a 90-day period, because now we want to help them talk through what does it mean to have your a conversation with your manager about getting additional training or getting a promotion, or what it means to be on the supervisory track. Like, how do you do that? And so that means we're asking our staff to do things a little bit differently because we want to push ourselves in a different direction. And that applies to all of our programming, including those with criminal records. So how do you change that at the organizational level? You've got to change what you're measuring.
And lastly, on the individual level, we always talk about entrepreneurship. So in the spaces I've been in and the people I work with, we talk about how do you harvest your lessons and apply them in ways that add value and dignity to yourself and to the others you positively impact while making some coins at it. Using myself as an example, I always saw myself as sort of expert in the reentry field. So I sought opportunities within the reentry field, and I understood that only those of us who've been bitten by the snake can tell each other how it feels. So I was very good at volunteering at programs and matriculating program content to that population. So in that spirit, the men and women I work with, I always scan for like what opportunities are out there. And to give you an example, a few years ago when the EEOCs came out about them not being able to disparage against people with criminal backgrounds so long as the position they're going for is not connected to their crime. Then I, at the time, was still doing work with the Ohio Organizer campaign, so I began working with my leaders on how they can get into that niche and help educate and create awareness to employers around that. And then I would go to people at the OOC and say, hey, hire this person. They know how to unpack this real well. And so that helps sort of tie their gift of gab, so to speak, into that niche, and then they can get out there and find value in speaking to this issue that's germane to them and germane to us all. So it's about lesson harvesting, and what you'll find is that this population is filled with resiliency, and they're very innovative and creative in how they survive every day. So it's a matter of a new narrative, a reframing, and a repacking and a unpacking that in an appropriate niche. So if we bring the resources and the community around that and help create these spaces for them, they can do something relevant and earn a couple of coins while doing it.
Feel very special. Good evening, everybody. With tonight being election night, and if issue 1 should pass, I'm wondering what the impact, if any, would be on collateral sanctions. I'm thinking specifically specifically regarding the reclassification of drug use related felonies into misdemeanors. I'm wondering what that would look like and what the impact would be.
So I'm a part of, Damien and I are both part of the Issue 1 campaign, but I was specifically contracted by the campaign to help educate the nonprofit community about Issue 1. And so I do believe there will be some limited impact on reducing collateral sanctions for those who have drug possession as their most serious offense. So Towards Employment got involved. We did a look back at our data, and in 2017, about 100 of our reentry job placements had drug possession as their most serious offense, which means they had a felony 4 or 5. And if Issue 1 passes tonight, those felonies could be reclassified as misdemeanors, which puts them in better position for sealing. And sealing is a whole nother conversation, because sealing isn't all that it's cracked up to be, particularly for those who want to pursue healthcare jobs, because healthcare employers they can't see what you've done, but they can see that you have a sealed record, and then you check in the job application that you don't have a criminal record because you had your record sealed, and then it looks like you lied. So Towards Employment's had that conversation with Metro and UH, so I think they're changing their practice, but that's a whole nother issue. So we know that the report that Peter referenced, I believe 56% of the collateral sanctions in state law are specifically related to those with felonies. And so if someone is able to have their felony reclassified as a misdemeanor, in which sealing it's independent of sealing, then those laws are no longer barring that individual from having access to a job. Now, there might be other reasons why they don't have access to those jobs, which we can talk about, racism and bias in hiring and all sorts of other things, but the legal barrier has been removed, which it creates a different problem for us to resolve, but it's a good thing because it elevates another problem that has to be unpacked. And right now, people can hide behind the legal barrier. And so we're taking away another way, an approach for employers to not hire someone who wants to compete for that position. So I do believe it'll have limited impact on that group specifically. And right now, I think there's 2,668 individuals currently incarcerated with drug possession as their most serious offense. And so imagine year over year, those individuals will no longer have an F4, F5 classification, because if Issue 1 passes, that classification will no longer exist. You could only charge someone with a misdemeanor. So I do think it'll have a limited impact, probably not far enough, which means that there's a lot more work to do, because those with drug possession as their most serious offense are about 5% of Ohio's prison population. And so, what about everybody else who is going to come home, which they will, and what happens to them when they're competing for jobs too? So still a lot of work to do, but it will have some impact.
Thank our panel. Yes. Okay, and thank you. Thank you all for coming out. We have one more event as part of our criminal justice series, which will be next month, December 6th, which will be at the Martin Luther King branch of the Cleveland Library, where now there's a photo exhibit entitled Prison Nation, which is a series of photos that were found in the archives at San Quentin. So if you haven't seen that yet, I encourage you to go see it. And we'll have a panel of formerly incarcerated folks, including Asia, who's here, and Damien, and a few others who will be on that panel. So that's on December 6th at the Martin Luther King Library at 6 p.m. So again, one more hand for the panel, and thank you all for coming out.